So with that, let us go ahead and get started. Again, this is moving from live in-person to live online, what you need to know. This is a special webinar we've put together as a response to the current conditions with the coronavirus outbreak and the fact that all of us are starting to practice social distancing, and the whole concept of face-to-face instruction has kind of gone out the window, at least for a little while. We are really happy that you have been able to join us today. We want to give you some baseline information on the things that you need to know in terms of what AIA requires from you. And then we're going to go through some tips and tricks along the way of things that you may find useful. Our agenda for today is to go through our recognized delivery types, talk about what AIA's requirements are for live online learning programs, and then go into some of the technical challenges and suggestions that we have for you, as well as how you can prepare your instructors. When we talk about our different delivery types, AIA recognizes really three types of delivery. We have live delivery, we have on-demand delivery, and we have nano learning. Within each of those categories, we have different subsets by the sessions. In a live delivery, you have the option of delivering in person or online. In on-demand, you have the option of the traditional e-learning, or what we call print or other. And then in nano learning, which is one of the newer things that we have added in with our 2019 standards, you have the ability to deliver nano learning. These are courses that are smaller than one learning unit, either in person, online, or as e-learning. One of the things that you may notice is that if you are a basic provider, and in our category of providers, we have professional providers, architecture firm providers, and we have our basic and our passport providers, as well as our platform providers. Basic providers have some limits on what they can and cannot do. Basic providers are only permitted to deliver live courses in person in a specific region of the AIA. For the time being, through May 31st, we are waiving the restriction that basic providers cannot deliver online courses. We are going to allow basic providers to deliver their live courses via webinar or streaming media. Basic providers are still not allowed to deliver on-demand e-learning programs. So as a basic provider, if you are a basic provider and you're used to doing in-person lunch and learns, through May 31st and potentially longer, we will be setting this up so that you can deliver your courses and giving you permission to deliver your courses as live streamed courses. When you are delivering live online courses, we have a few requirements that you have to meet. There has to be a live, real-time facilitator or instructor. That means that the course can't be pre-recorded. It means that you have to have somebody on the line who is handling all of your interactions. You have to have an ability for your participants to interact with the instructor, and that can be as simple as a Q&A pod like we have off to the right-hand side. This gives your participants the ability to ask questions and to be able to interact with the instructor along the way. You have to have a mechanism for ensuring attendance and participation. On most streaming platforms, there is an ability to get a report that will let you know who was online, when they attended, when they were online, how long they were online. Now, we're not saying that you have to make sure people are there for the absolute full 50 minutes, but if you have somebody that logs in and spends about 5 minutes and then disappears, that person does not get credit for the course. So we need to be able to show that there was full attendance, the same way you would if somebody were in a classroom, walked into the classroom for the first 5 minutes, got up and walked out. We expect people to take the time and energy to be there for the full duration of the course. The content requirements are the same as you've seen for your live in-person courses. There are no differences to the live online programs. For live in-person programs, You have all of the things that are outlined in the AIA standards for continuing education programs. Those same things are true when you're delivering online. The only difference between an in-person and an online live delivery in our minds is the mechanism and the location. So in a live in-person, you're in the classroom with the teachers or with the students. In a live online, you're going to be delivering over a medium like Adobe Connect or some of the other things we'll talk about in a moment. Your courses then do not need to be resubmitted for approval if you are moving them from being a live in-person to a live online. The same exact course can be taught, and it does not need to be sent out for reapproval or new submittal. When you create the sessions for those courses, you will be seeing that you have an option to check whether it is live or is online, or I'm sorry, in-person or online. If it is an in-person course, you check that box and you fill all the address information as you have been doing to this point. If it's an online delivery of the live course, you just check that online box, and it will give you some options there for things like a URL and other information about the session. So what do you need at your end to deliver an online course as a live course? You're going to have a platform to do that delivery. Some of the platforms that you'll see out there, Adobe Connect, which is what we're using today, Cisco WebEx, GoToMeeting, Zoom, there are lots of others out there. If you do a Google search for webinar platforms, you're going to find sites that will list 10, 15, 20, 30 different options for you. Some things to consider as you go through this is that the platform, you want to be able to adapt to what you're doing. Some platforms are really well suited for doing online meetings. GoToMeeting, for instance, is great for doing in-person meetings with 10 to 15 people. The GoToWebinar platform or their GoToTraining platform are more appropriate for doing live online delivery. You want to look at the capabilities of the platform. You want to look at the things that you're going to be doing. You'll also need to look at the size of your expected audience. We are using an Adobe Connect webinar room today. It has a capacity of up to 1,000 participants. We currently have about 542 of you online. So we're using the platform to the best of its capabilities. One of the things to be aware of at this point in time, with everything going on in the world as it is right now and everybody moving to trying to do things virtual, many of these platforms are hitting some of their technical and their bandwidth top end. A number of you, for instance, are noting that we've had some issue with our sound already on this webinar. That is in part because we've got you streaming out and we've got it coming through over Adobe Connect. Adobe's platform at this point in time may be somewhat busy. It may be that your own internet pipe is a little bit flooded with other people working remotely, especially if you're working on a home connection, Fios or Xfinity or a DSL line or something like that. Oftentimes that will come into play with the platform. But as you look at these different platforms, you want to look at the platforms that will meet your basic requirements. If you know that most of your classes are going to have fewer than 100 participants, then you don't need to go with a top-end huge webinar platform that handles up to 1,000 people at one time. You'll want to start with something that's much simpler and easier to use. If that seems daunting to you, we do have platform providers who are able to assist you. Our platform providers are at a special category of AIA continuing education providers. They are the type of providers that are permitted by us to help manage your programs, to help report on your behalf, to help you with all of your delivery. On our screen now, you can see a list of all of our platform providers that are able to support live online courses. I have included the contact information for the person at that provider who is able to assist you. So we'll make sure that this information is available outside of this webinar as well. But if you just want to take a moment to take a look at this, you can see our different platform providers, the different points of contact. We don't have any preference of one over the other. All of our platform providers are our close partners and understand all of the things that we need to do within our system. If you're not sure what kind of provider you are, that's a question that you can send to ces@aia.org, and let us know that you have a question about what type you are. We'll be able to reply pretty quickly to let you know whether you are a platform provider or a passport provider or a basic provider, a firm provider, or a professional provider. But again, the AIA platform providers are standing by to be able to assist in your delivery of live online courses. That said, there's only a limited number of them. They have limited bandwidth of their own in terms of the things that they're doing. So they're working really hard to transition to support this. So if you reach out and contact them and you've got to wait a little while before you can move through with them, be patient. This is a new experience for all of us. It is a new direction for all of us to go. As of 2019, only about 25 to 30% of our content was delivered in an online format, and most of that was delivered as online on demand. Your traditional e-learning courses of only about 4 to 6% was delivered as live online. So this is a change for a lot of our providers, and we know that this is something that you all are going to be transitioning to and getting used to as you go along. Let's talk about the other things that you need. You need to have, and this is really what your instructors and your facilitators will need to have. They need to make sure they're on a high-speed internet connection, preferably on a wired connection, not a wireless connection. One thing to take into consideration, especially for people that are social distancing and are working from home and telecommuting, oftentimes residential internet plans are not always guaranteed speeds. So you'll want to make sure that you have people who are on good solid connections and are at good speeds. One way to avoid excessive use of bandwidth, you'll notice for this webinar, we didn't turn on any cameras. We aren't using any sort of streaming video with this. That was in part because we wanted to minimize the bandwidth overhead of the presentation. You want to make sure that your instructors and facilitators are using a headset or some kind of high-quality microphone. Your presenters can be on a phone or using computer audio. For this session, I'm actually using a phone connection because I was a little concerned about the computer audio and bandwidth issues. And as you're seeing at your end, where you may be hearing clipping coming down the pipe, oftentimes that clipping, if it starts at my end, everybody participating is going to hear that. If the bandwidth issue is at your end, you may have participants that are hearing some clipping. But by me calling in through a phone line, I'm at least relatively confident that my voice is coming out to you and going out to Adobe's site at full high quality, and then as it is pushed out to the 540 plus participants on the call, then it becomes an issue of bandwidth at their end that we see issues. We strongly, strongly advise that your facilitators and your speakers don't use speakerphones. They pick up too much noise from around the room. Oftentimes you can sound like it's hollow or you're at the bottom of a well, and they just don't work well. If you have multiple presenters, if you've got a panel discussion, for instance, speakerphone might be able to work, although again, if you're doing and practicing social distance, you've got people sitting hopefully at least 6 feet apart. So using that speakerphone may not be the most appropriate method. What you might find works better for a panel is honestly to have your presenters in their separate locations, each individually wired in. You're going to want to make sure that your presenters are in quiet spaces. Interior offices work well for this. Things that don't have access to the outside world where fire trucks go by, or as my case, I was a little worried this morning. I have a next door neighbor that was cutting down a tree. So I was a little concerned that you all were going to hear the sounds of chainsaws and wood chippers for most of this presentation. Thankfully, they've stopped, but these are things you take into consideration. You want to do whatever you can to eliminate or at least limit what sort of outside disturbances you had. Again, adjusting to sort of the way we're working now, where people are working from home, you've got to make sure that people, if they are working at home and there are kids in the house or there are other people in the house, that those people understand that for the time being, don't disturb the person on the line. Sit behind a closed door, put a note on the door that says do not disturb, go through all the things you need to do to make sure that you are in as quiet a delivery space as you can be. As you develop your presentation materials, again, video is not necessary. There's actually some research that shows that video can be detrimental to the learning experience, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. You want to make sure that you have strong content in your slide decks. It doesn't have to be glitzy or flashy. Today, I purposefully used a pretty scaled back slide deck. We've got pretty much text on a slide as we're going through. What really should drive what you're doing in your online presentation is your content. Whether that's the subject matter expertise of your facilitator or your presenter, or whether that is what's in the content on the slides itself, that's what makes the difference. Now, you can go through all sorts of extra information to put in, details and put in pretty pictures and so on. Just remember, again, be cognizant of the bandwidth load. So if you're loading, multi-megapixel photographs of high resolution, those are going to have to be pushed across the line to everybody who's listening, and they're sharing the same line with your audio. They're sharing the same line with everything else that you're doing. As you prepare, if you're an instructor or you're responsible for preparing instructors, there are some things to keep in mind with online delivery. It's different. It's very different. You may have somebody who is the best instructor in the classroom. The problem when you put them online is that you are in a very different environment. For those instructors that live off of the energy of the room, the ones that need that instant feedback from people who are present, they're not going to have that. And it can feel really awkward when you're sitting in a room all by yourself talking. It's hard to gauge whether your class is understanding what you're saying. It's hard to know whether they're following along. You don't get those sort of blank expressions that say, oh, I need to go back and repeat that. You don't get those excited expressions when you go, yes, that got through to them. So make sure that as you do this, that your instructors are ready for this. Part of the way to make sure that they're ready and part of the way to make sure that they can do this well is to practice, have them prepare. Do at least one technical run-through. If it's the first time they've ever taught online, you're going to want to hear what they sound like. You're going to want to be able to give them feedback in terms of their delivery and their style. You need to make sure more than ever that your presenters and your instructors know their materials. Their expertise is what's going to shine through as they deliver. What they know, how much they know, how they deliver it will be extremely important. You can't cover it up with somebody who just has a great sort of stage presence because no one sees them. Even if you put the tiny little video up, that isn't going to really help that much in terms of the overall piece. So your slide materials, your presentation materials, and your facilitator really needs to be on the mark from the beginning. Make sure you know your platform. Make sure you understand how the platform works. There's nothing worse than logging into a webinar only to have the presenter fumble around trying to figure out how to change slides or forgetting to mute or unmute or all of those different things. And be prepared for technical glitches. Again, my apologies to those of you that are getting some audio clipping. We've done what we can at our end in terms of making sure that we've got the signal going out as strong as possible. We are aware that with some of the different platforms, Adobe Connect, GoToMeeting, WebEx has had some issues as well. Those platforms and those pieces are definitely somewhat overwhelmed. So there's definitely some technical issues going on. Some other things with the platform, Adobe Connect, for instance, gives you the option to do a web-based client or an actual download of an add-in for the install. One of the things that we found useful with Adobe Connect is for those people who are using the downloaded client, it tends to be a better experience. Now, we know that in some cases people can't use a downloaded client because they're not allowed to install anything on their computer, but it is something that can help along the way. When you're presenting online, again, practice your delivery. Your tone and your pacing are important. I have really tried, as I've been going through our presentation this afternoon, to make sure that I'm modulating my voice, that I'm watching how quickly or how slowly I talk, that I'm aware of where I'm pausing, that I have those things in there. This is a learned behavior. You will have some presenters who, quite frankly, will start off and not be very good. Let me give you an example. When presenting online, make sure that you practice your delivery. Tone and pacing are important. Speak clearly, have energy. I'm sure you can see a difference there versus make sure you practice your delivery, your tone, and your pacing. They're important. You have to speak clearly. You have to have some energy in your voice. All of those things are going to be what help your learners get the most out of their experience, that they're actually learning from the content you're presenting, that they're actually getting something from it. Again, this is something that truly takes some work. Some tips for your instructors, especially those that are a little uncomfortable being alone in a room and just talking. Some of these things are silly, but they work. Put a mirror in front of you. If you can see the look on your face, if you can watch your own expression, it helps in terms of getting that energy to come through. Make sure that you're in a space you're comfortable with. If you're an instructor that likes to move around the room, then make sure you've got a headset with a long enough cord to allow you to get up. You don't want to be tethered behind your computer if you're somebody who needs that kind of space. Your instructor should arrive early, be online, and be ready well before the scheduled start time. I have sat through webinars that have not gone well when the instructor has shown up at exactly the time the webinar is supposed to start, is not prepared because they weren't really familiar with the platform and clearly hadn't ever really practiced with that platform. Those things come through pretty quickly, and those things will blow up your whole event before it's even started. Expect to stay a little late. Leave time for questions. Even though we have a set time on this webinar from 1:30 to 2:30 Eastern time, if we go beyond the 2:30 time, I'm prepared to stay a little longer and answer any questions to make sure things are filled out. We don't cut off just because we say, well, our 50 minutes is up, thank you very much, bye. You want to make sure that you're engaging your audience as much as possible, and that includes leaving time to make sure that questions get answered. Some other tips for you, especially if you're new to this, make sure you have a producer. I can't stress this enough, the benefit that this provides. Allison Schaefer is on the line with me right now. Allison has been answering a number of questions in the background. She's been dealing with the different technical issues people have been having. That's allowed me to focus on the content. Allison is here to make sure that everything runs smoothly behind the scenes. So she handles the technology, she handles any technical issues, she handles all of those pieces. I get to focus on the materials that we're presenting, and I get to be the one that's talking, and I don't get distracted by things that are popping up over to the side with somebody who has questions about how do I access this, where do I get that, all those different pieces. Again, your instructors, the tone and all the things filter through. Smile, be excited, be natural. Walk around if that's your style. Talk with your hands. You all can't see me, but I am gesticulating wildly as I speak right now. It's just the way that I normally present. And so because I normally talk like that, because I normally present like that, I'm still doing that now. Hopefully that's coming through, that you can feel that energy in the presentation. If you don't have that kind of energy, if you can't feel that, your participants will basically tune out. They will have shut down a long time ago and have basically pushed it off to the side. That's not what you want. You want them to be able to participate, be engaged, be involved. Skip the video. This is somewhat of a controversial issue for some people. They like the idea that people will see their little talking head in the corner. If you absolutely positively have to have video, go ahead and turn it on at the beginning, maybe for your introductions, so that people can see who it is that's presenting. Now, you'll notice that in this presentation today, I don't have video on, but in the very first cover slide, I did make sure that my picture was there. That allows you to get some connection to who it is that's presenting. You can start to put a face with the voice and so on. Part of the reason for skipping the video, number one, is it adds technical complexity. Setting up a webcam, getting it to work, getting the high enough quality stream out there, making sure all of that happens well, that adds a level of overhead that you don't need, especially if you're new to this. If this is a new endeavor for you, you've not done a lot of webinars, you're not sure about the technical proficiency of your instructors and of your producers, keep the video complexity out of it. There's also some research that shows that having the little talking head video when you're trying to do online learning can diminish the learning. And that's because it creates cognitive overload. What happens is you've got too many things going on the screen. You've got a slide deck in the middle of the screen. You've got a Q&A pod over to the side. You've got this little talking head video. And your learners now don't know where to focus. Should they be watching the person talking? Should they be looking at the content that's on the screen? Where should it be? By taking that video out of the picture, you've limited some of the cognitive overload that goes with that, and at the same time, you've limited your technical complexity. So I want to open it up now. I see that there are a number of questions here. We're about a half an hour in, and I wanted to make sure that we offered plenty of time for Q&A on this. I know a lot of you have different questions technology-wise, questions about things about what kind of provider you are, and so on. If you have questions about what type of provider you are, you want to know whether you're a basic or a passport or a firm or a professional provider, you can email us at ces@aia.org. Let us know your provider number, and we can quickly look it up for you. We will be posting the presentation on the website. We are going to repost this recording. I'm also going to do a PDF of the slide deck so that you can get the contact information for our platform providers. All of that information will be posted up later today. And again, we are repeating the same webinar tomorrow at 2 o'clock. So we've got a question here about, is it okay to have a recorded presentation combined with live Q&A with the presenter? Yes, that is something you can do. So under the terms of what's considered live online, one of the requirements, to go back a little bit, for on-demand e-learning, we have a quiz requirement. We have more robust requirements in terms of how you measure and check learning. That's so that we're compliant with AIA standards as well as compliant with standards that many of the state boards and registration boards for architects have put in place to require that there's some sort of reference that learning took place. For live courses, we assume that those quizzes don't need to be there because the students have a chance to interact with the instructor. If they have questions, if they need clarification, they have somebody they can talk to. We don't allow a fully recorded presentation just to be streamed out because then there's not that opportunity for interaction. But if you have a recorded presentation and you have a live expert or presenter there who can answer questions, that's acceptable. That does fall into the category of a live online delivery. Other places you can use that is if you've got a really good segment from a subject matter expert, but you know that that person is not available to do every single class, you can present that video content, audio content as part of the live online delivery as long as you have that ability for live Q&A. It's the same thing that would happen in the classroom. In a classroom, a live classroom course, when I'm in the same room with my students, I may very well show a video as part of that course, but I'm there to supplement and enhance what was in that video content. That's the same thing that you would be doing online. So we have, again, a lot of questions here about what type of provider what type of provider category they fall into. Again, if you contact us at ces@aia.org, we can let you know what type of provider you are. I will tell you, in general, if you are a not-for-profit or you are an academic institution, you are most likely a professional provider. Professional level providers are able to deliver content in any of our formats, live, on-demand, nano-learning. If you are an architecture firm or a design firm where at least one principal or owner is an architect, you most likely fall into the architecture firm category. Again, our architecture firm providers are eligible to teach content in any of our formats. If you are a building product manufacturer or another commercial organization, that's where it gets a little sticky and you may fall into either the basic or the passport category. Typically, those that are in the basic category are smaller regional vendors or organizations. So you're only teaching in a limited geographic region. The restrictions for basic providers is that they're only allowed to teach in one AIA region and only allowed to teach live in person. So if you know that you've only been teaching within 50 to 100 miles of your office and you've never done anything online, you might be a basic provider, and by emailing us at ces@aia.org, we can verify that for you. Again, though, for all of our providers across the board, we are allowing all of our providers to do live online delivery. So even if you are a basic provider, you have the ability to deliver live online through at least May 31st. Depending on how things go, depending on the directives of the CDC, and depending on what we're doing in terms of social distancing, we may extend that period of time as we see where things are towards the end of May. Question here if there is a size limit for online classes. No, there's not. Just as we don't have a size limit for your in-person classes, we don't have a size limit for your online classes. As a general rule of thumb, though, really big classes are really hard to make interactive. There are currently, I think at our peak, we had 500 something online for this session. Part of the reason that we only have the Q&A pod up on the screen is just because opening up a chat pod, opening up your lines to live questions would have been next to impossible with that many people on the line. So smaller classes tend to be more interactive. If you have really small classes, you have the ability to open up their microphones or have them all dialed into a phone connection so that you can carry on conversations much like you would in a regular live classroom or regular in-person classroom. Let's see what other questions we have here. So there's a question here about should existing scheduled courses be updated from live to online? If you have already created, if you have a live in-person session, you had a lunch and learn at a firm scheduled for next Tuesday, and they've contacted you and said, hey, we need to move this to online as virtual, but you've already created the session for that, you can keep that session in there. If you are creating new events and you are scheduling new things, when you create the session, make sure that you put those sessions in as live online sessions versus the in-person sessions. At this point in time, the differential is really more for our reporting purposes. Eventually, it will be used in our online catalog, but right now, it's more of a reporting and scheduling thing. So we know that for the next couple weeks, you may have things that you've already scheduled out. You don't need to worry about going back and changing those or creating new sessions. You are welcome to create new sessions if you want to, and you don't have to worry about the one that was listed as live in person. It can sit there unused. That's fine. But there's no requirement that you go back in immediately and make all those changes. There's a question here, if we do a 1-hour course, what's the minimum amount of time people must attend to get credit? All right, so this is going to be a little tricky. By our rules, they should be attending the whole session. That would mean that they are there for the entire 50-minute hour. We know, though, that people might show up a little bit late. Someone might have to step out a little bit early. I can't give you a hard and fast rule that says they must be present for 42 minutes and 15 seconds for it to count. What you really need to do is use your best judgment as to what you consider adequate time for them to truly be able to have been in a learning experience. Again, by our rules, they should be in the room for the entire 50 minutes. But we have some flexibility, and again, we leave that at your discretion to determine what makes sense. Now, if somebody is only present, they sign in, they say hello, and then they leave, that doesn't count. And that would be the same thing if you were doing a lunch and learn. We get questions oftentimes from people that say, hey, we had somebody who just popped into the room, they grabbed a sandwich, they shook hands, and then they left. Should we give them credit? Well, no, you don't give them credit. The same thing is true in an online environment. If they're clearly not present for the majority of the presentation, it shouldn't count. But again, I can't tell you that there's a specific cutoff in terms of that time. Again, You don't need to adjust anything in terms of your provider account, what type of provider you are, in order to deliver live online. If you want to deliver live on demand, I'm sorry, let me back up. If you want to deliver on-demand courses, e-learning courses that are taken at the learner's time frame, where there is not a live presenter and there is not a live instructor, the on-demand courses are only available for Passport, Platform, Professional, and Firm providers. Basic providers may not deliver on-demand courses. However, basic providers can deliver live online courses at least through May 31st. And again, we'll reevaluate that as we see what the situation looks like closer to that time. Question here, does Google Hangouts work well? I am not overly familiar with Google Hangouts. I know that there are some organizations that have had really good luck with Google Hangouts. It's a platform that's readily available. It's relatively easy to use, and yes, it could work well. It is limited in terms of the scale. You're not going to be able to do classes with hundreds of people, but if you're doing smaller interventions and you're doing the replacement for a lunch and learn in a firm, Google Hangouts may indeed be a great option for you, and it is definitely a low-cost entry. And I'm just scrolling through here to see what other questions we've got on here. An acceptable minimum internet speed. So for your presenters, this is a really good question, and my answer is going to be really it depends. If you are doing live video and your presenters are also streaming their audio using computer audio and not a phone connection, then you want a good high-speed connection, and we're talking at that point probably in the 25 to 50 megabits per second at a minimum. I am currently on a 200 megabit per second connection. I hesitated to use the computer audio, not so much in my case because of my own internet connectivity, but because I know that as a residential user, if Verizon, I'm on Verizon Fios, if Verizon decides that my area is busy, I am not guaranteed those speeds at all times. And so I kind of moved away from using that piece. But you want really kind of biggest pipe you can. Certainly dial-up is not going to cut it. Some of the slower, older DSL speeds are not going to cut it. You need to make sure that you're on a decent enough bandwidth. If you're doing video especially, that pumps out a lot of data across the line. And again, the best thing you can do, test your platform. Have your presenters log in, do a test run, see what it looks like. See if you get that clipping and cutting. If you have a problem when it's just you and the presenter and maybe a couple other people who you're testing it out with, if you have issues with a small group like that, those are only going to increase as you get a larger and larger audience. A question here on these things, can panelists call in as well? Yes, in our session today, I'm the only presenter, but we could easily have had other presenters involved in the process. Last week, we ran a session out of AIA's headquarters where we did panel discussions, and we had 4 panelists and a moderator, and they were in 5 different locations, all logged in at the same time, communicating back into our AIA headquarters boardroom, where we were doing sort of a blended situation where we had presenters remote and an audience actually local in the room. So yes, you can have your panelists connected there. It does open up options for you to be able to include people that traditional face-to-face doesn't always get. So if you've got that subject matter expert, let's say you're a building product manufacturer and you've got a new product category that you're trying to explain, you may have that subject matter expert who's back at your corporate headquarters. That person's not going to be able to travel or get on the road for all these different things. This is now an opportunity for you to allow that person to participate without having to worry about the overhead of getting them from your corporate headquarters all the way across the country someplace else. Now they can present virtually. So when, again, back to the question about bandwidth and internet limitations, honestly, I recommend that, and I would still recommend this, that your presenters, as much as possible, are able to connect with a phone connection. only because, and I would say it's probably true for the next couple of weeks until a lot of these platform vendors can bolster their own infrastructure. A lot of the limitations we're seeing right now are really not problems with the platforms themselves. It's not technology issues. It's just that so many people are trying to work virtually right now that they have stressed all of these platforms really to their limits. You know, I've seen across the board comments about really every platform I'm familiar with has had some sort of technical things along the way. So my hat's off to the network engineers and the software engineers at all these companies who I know right now are really probably putting in some long hours trying to bolster their own infrastructure, the things we kind of take for granted as we go through. But if your facilitators are able to connect through a phone line, that takes one piece out of the puzzle. Now, I will say that if you've got presenters that are using voice over IP applications, that sort of defeats the purpose because that voice over IP is using the same exact bandwidth as the audio through the platform would have done as computer audio. A question here is, if your presentation has a mix of video and audio and you want to be able to push that across the line, how do you do that? That's honestly going to be dependent on your platform. One of the reasons that we use Adobe Connect as our platform for our webinars and for our learning programs is because it gives us the flexibility to do just that. We can put different, what they call pods, into the Adobe Connect environment that allow us to stream video out. Whereas other platforms, GoToMeeting for instance, doesn't have that capability. If you want to present a video and if you know that your content has that, that's one of the things to take into consideration as you evaluate the different options available to you. Some platforms do some things better than others. So as you start to look at your capabilities and the different platforms, the things you're going to want to look at are what are the size restrictions? How big can a class be? What are the technical limitations? If you know you need to present audio and you know you need to stream video, you have recorded video, make sure that you are looking for a platform that supports that. If you want to make sure that people can do dial-in, make sure that you have that there. We did not, in this instance, open up phone lines for you all to dial in. There are two reasons for that. One, it's a lot of people calling in on phones, and we knew that this was going to be more of a presentation than it was an interactive piece with you being able to talk. The other, quite frankly, is it's expensive. As you start to get people dialing in, you're going to pay for the phone connections, and sometimes that's 3 to 6 cents per minute. That doesn't sound like a lot until you figure out that a 1-hour presentation is $3.60 for every person who's dialed in. And when you have 500 people dialed in, it's a pretty big bill to be paying for that when you can stream things out the other way. All of these are things that you should take into consideration as you evaluate the different platforms you're looking at. And I'm going to scroll through. There are a few other questions here that are coming up. Let me move on down through this. Will AIA be guiding us to firms who want online presentations? Will we be collecting contact info and pushing that out? We aren't at this point in time doing that. We would encourage you as providers to use some of the same contacts that you've been using and just let them know that you have this availability. We are encouraging you to reach out and get going with the firms that you've worked with. As we start to move a little further along, our hope is to be able to provide that kind of matchmaking and get you some of those connections, but right now we don't have the infrastructure in place to be able to do that. There's a suggestion here that you should record the technical run-through so that you can experience the presentation from the perspective of the audience. That is a great suggestion. If you're working with a new presenter, somebody who's not familiar with online, they may think that they nailed it. And when you play back the recording for them, there are some eye-opening moments where they realize that, oh, I basically pepper my entire speech with lots of ums and hms and pauses. All of those are things that you may not even be aware of as a presenter, but when you listen to that recording, it's an eye-opening thing. So that's a really good example and a really good suggestion that you record that session so that the presenter can learn from it and make adjustments as necessary. So we got a question here about how do you handle sign-ins? Will the attendee be prompted to sign in with their name and their AIA number? Again, this is going to be dependent upon your platform. Some platforms will allow you to post forms within the application itself. So within Adobe Connect, I could put in I could put in a poll, and in that poll, I could say, give me your name and your AIA number. That would be one way I could handle it. Other platforms allow you to have a registration page up front, and on that registration page, you can capture all of the information that you need. So you want their first name, their last name, an email address, and their member number. Those are things that can go into that registration form before they even get access to the webinar. We could have done that with today's webinar. We decided to make today's just an open first come, first serve, and we opened up the doors and let people in. But we could have required a pre-registration as part of this. So that's one way you can capture all those pieces. If you're doing a online lunch and learn for a firm, you can also coordinate with whomever it is at the firm that you're working with and get that information from them and track all those pieces. Is there an example of a live recorded event that you could view? We actually have a couple on our AIU platform that are recordings of live courses that we've done in the past for AIU, done by some of our strategic partners as well as our internal groups. So if you go to AIU and you look for some of those live courses, you can see some examples. Many of our platform providers, again, that list that I showed earlier, have examples of courses that were done by some of their current clients that are done as live online courses. Question, are you still expected to provide lunch if you're doing this for a group or an office? I will leave that for your discussion with whomever you're working with at those offices. We at AIA have never said that you have to provide lunch. We love the fact that you all do lunch and learns. We know that there is a great benefit when you provide food, that gets people to show up. But there is no requirement that you send them a virtual lunch as far as we can enforce or push. Again, a question here is, can basic providers go ahead and start doing webinars? Yes, you may do webinars and live online delivery at least through May 31st. We will send out a notification to you all letting you know that, and then if we extend that date, we'll send out another notification that lets you know. Question, can we use this presentation to train our instructors? By all means, we will again post a recording of this presentation. We are going to run an encore of this same webinar tomorrow. Again, it'll be a live delivery tomorrow. If we see that there's a need and a lot of interest, we'll schedule additional webinars for the next week or so just to make sure that people are aware of what's going on. If you are interested in the schedule of any of those webinars or any of our other content, go to that For Providers page on AIA.org. At the very top of that page, we have a listing of all of the webinars that we have scheduled so far for 2020, as well as what the topics will be for those. What's the best way to show product videos during the webinar if you need to? Typically, again, this goes back to the platform that you're using. So if you have videos that you incorporate into your normal presentation, then you're going to need to make sure that whatever platform you're using to deliver your live online course supports streaming that video out. Again, some platforms are better at this than others. Some don't offer that capability at all. So as you evaluate the different platforms and you look at the different options that you have for delivery, if you know you need to be able to show a video as part of your class, then you need to make sure you pick a platform that will support that. And again, I'm scrolling through a number of these questions. How do you recommend advertising these virtual learning opportunities to the typical lunch and learn audience? Again, I think a lot of ways that you can do this. One is if you are posting that you offer continuing education on your website, make a note that you can offer these courses now through virtual delivery. Put that up onto your website so people know. If you already have a list of contacts that you use, if there are firms that you work with on a regular basis, if there are AIA components that you work with on a regular basis, reach out to them to let them know, hey, we've moved into being able to do these as virtual delivery. So if you need this, and we know that your members need this, or we know that your architects in your firm need this, reach out to us. We have the capability of presenting in a remote fashion so people can continue to get their continuing education credits while they are being sequestered in their homes as part of social distancing. And again, I keep going through. What platforms would I suggest for smaller webinars like under 20 or 30? I'm going to avoid recommending any particular platform, in part because I don't want to show any sort of brand preference or any sort of implied endorsement, and also because it really is dependent upon what you need to do. If you do a Google search for online webinar platforms or online training platforms, you'll get a really good list. There will be at least the first 10 choices. Oftentimes are some good overview sites that have done reviews of different platforms, what their capabilities are, what their weaknesses are, as well as their cost points. Take a look at those and you can determine what you need. So some of it's not just how many people, but it's also what are all the different things that you want to be able to do. And at the end of the day, how much are you willing to spend? To present online, would you need something in the CES portal to get a URL for your live course? No, but when you set up a session for a live online course, one of the fields that we capture is a URL. At present, that's not pointed anywhere or pushed anywhere. So we don't necessarily, you don't have to put that in. In terms of advertising, especially if things are open sessions and they're available to anybody to attend, post those on your website. Get those out there through whatever media you typically use to reach out to architects to get them to come to your live classes, your in-person classes. Those same channels will work. Push things out on your social media. If you know you're going to be doing a webinar next Tuesday, get that onto your social media channel so that people who are sitting at home looking for ways that they can meet their CE requirements, that's going to come across the things that they're doing. A question here. We have an assessment link to an online test that they use for on-demand and sometimes for live. Would that work? Yes, you can. If you are doing a fully recorded session, which is what this question asks about, a fully recorded session needs to have a quiz. So if you have that capability, that's great. If you are delivering live online, the live ones, you have to, this is a live, right now what we're doing is a live online course. You all cannot come to this site in 45 minutes and start it over from scratch and get credit for it. You had to be here when I started talking. That's what makes it live online, is I am live here with you. We are all virtually in the same place at the same time. If the course does not require that all of the students are present at the same time, they can start it and stop it when they need to, that falls into the on-demand category. That's a different kind of course, and it has different requirements. Question here, can you explain further the role of the producer? Yes, the producer is the kind of critical back office presence. You all have not seen this because it's not showing up on your screen, but Allison has been behind the scenes. There have been a number of questions that have come in related to where can I find a link to this? What's going on with the sound? How can I do these things? Allison has been working behind the scenes, and she's been answering those questions. If I had a more complex presentation where I was mixing in maybe some streaming video and then maybe some pre-recorded video, and I had different layouts and different structures to the presentation, Allison is the person who would be making all those switches behind the scenes. That allows me as the facilitator, the presenter, to really just focus on presenting. So the role of the producer is to offload all of those sort of technical administrative tasks off of the presenter. I don't have to watch for the questions about what's going on with the sound. Why can't I hear? Is the person speaking yet? What's going on? Can I get these slides? Where do I send this? That is just distraction for me as I'm doing the content presentation. Having Allison in the background being able to answer and take care of these things means that she's basically being able to offload those things that I would suddenly have to stop and go, hold on a second, folks, I've got 3 questions over here about the sound. Give me a minute so I can answer that. I didn't have to do that. She was already pushing answers to all of those things out to people. So a question about certificates of completion and evaluation. Again, depending on your platform, you have some different options here. In the Adobe Connect platform, for instance, I could push out a certificate of completion to you. Again, though, remember that for certificates of completion, technically, according to our standards, the certificate of completion only needs to be provided to a learner upon request. So you could put, and I could have put a slide at the end of this that said, if you need a certificate of completion, email me at, and put in the contact information, and then I can send them a certificate of completion after the fact. Course evaluation. I could add, within Adobe Connect, for instance, I could add a polling panel here. And that polling panel could actually be my evaluation. So I could put all of my evaluation questions into that poll. I don't have to show anybody the results of that poll. I don't have to make that public. And I could have that poll launch at the end of the presentation. So it gives people a chance to fill out their evaluations along the way. Those things, though, are going to be dependent upon the platform. Some platforms do this better than others. So you may have a platform that doesn't support doing any kind of polling or doesn't support doing any sort of interactive questioning. In that case, your evaluation might be something you have to send out after the fact and send them to a SurveyMonkey that gives them, the ability to give you an evaluation, or if you have another online evaluation tool, to use that. A good question here. With so many people working from home, do we recommend making ourselves available to present at other times other than the traditional lunchtime? This is a great opportunity, I think, for you to expand. It does mean a little extra work for you all as providers because now schedules change a little bit. You'll notice that we scheduled these webinars at 1:30 and 2 o'clock on a Wednesday and a Thursday. That was intentional. We know that we have providers that span the entire continental United States and are actually international. We try to schedule our webinars in a time period that makes sense to draw the largest audience. So we don't schedule them at 8 o'clock in the morning Eastern time because then we would lose our West Coast and Hawaii people who are not getting up in the middle of the night to listen to us. We don't schedule them typically on Mondays and Fridays. Those tend to be bad days to get people's eyeballs looking at things. So we tend to do webinars on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. And we tend to do them really midday Eastern time so that we're not too early for the West Coast and not too late for the East Coast. But you may find, depending on who you're working with, you may find that there's a firm that says, look, our people are busy throughout the entire day working on design stuff. Would it be possible for you to do a webinar at 5 o'clock Central Time? Because that's when we know we can get all of our firm together to listen to this. So this does offer you some flexibility to make yourselves available outside of those traditional, 12 to 1 windows that you would see for lunch and learn. A question here again about required attendance again, and whether you could use a certain platform coming through the same link. Really what we ask, and we know, and this actually leads to a broader question, typically we get the question, well, what happens when we do this and the entire firm is around a table in a conference room and there's only one login, but 9 people were there? How do we know they were there? We leave this to your coordination with that firm, for instance. So if I'm going into firm XYZ and they say, we want you to do a webinar for us and do this as a live thing, we're going to have all of our firm gather around in the conference room. Typically what I would do in that circumstance is find an administrative contact at that firm who will be sort of your eyes and ears. That's the person who can take attendance for you. That's the person who can get you the list. Usually they'll be happy to have somebody do this because they want to get credit for being there. We will take their word for it. We do have a code of ethics at AIA that says that you're not supposed to lie about things like whether you were actually in continuing education. So we hold our members to that. So if you get that attendance list from the organization you're working with, from the firm you're working with, we will take that as evidence that you've done your due diligence. Question, do students have to be pre-registered? No, that's completely up to you. That's your administrative overhead, how you want to do it. You may find it easier if people pre-register because then you'll have a good idea that you've captured all the information you need. but it is not required that people are pre-registered. Again, that's completely at your discretion. Here's a question that says, I've seen sessions where the presenter has called in from the person streaming the slides and content. Is that allowable if the presenter doesn't have wired internet connectivity? Absolutely. The requirement is that you have a live instructor. In all honesty, it doesn't have to even be a webinar. It doesn't have to have the visual component. It could be live online delivery done completely through audio conference. That is not the most effective method, but there is nothing in our standards and there is nothing that says that that isn't a viable alternative. It could even be something like you're going to do it as an audio conference and you have sent out your slide deck to them beforehand. It does mean a little more coordination because your presenter may have to say things like, hey, I'm now looking at slide 14, so that everybody's in the same place. But there is nothing that says that you have to use anything with fancy visuals or anything like that. What we're really driving to and what we really want to see is we want to see good content, good learning content being presented to our members. Sometimes the most effective way to do that is the simplest way to do that. And so we don't want to put a burden on you to say you have to come up with these complex technical solutions when something really easy could be done in its place. Now, the flip side of that is there are some platforms that will allow you to do really fancy things. Adobe Connect, for instance, I could have split us into different breakout rooms. I could have sent you off into your own little sessions to discuss and do things. So there are lots of complexities that you can add on top. But really just look at what you need to present. So you've got really a full range from very simple into very complex. And so as you get more mature with using these technologies and these platforms, then you can look at expanding what you're doing. But don't think that you've got to start off from day one with the really high end and we're going to do really fancy and incredible stuff. Start simple, get comfortable, figure out what works, and build from there. And again, I'm just going to scroll through a few more of these questions. When you're delivering live online courses, when you submit to AIA, is it the same process? It is exactly the same process. For live courses, whether they are delivered in person or online, you submit the courses the exact same way. The only difference is when you create the sessions for those courses, you will check off whether it is live online or whether it is live in person. A verification here, does the live online have to go the full 50 minutes? Yes. That is the requirement for a course that carries 1 LU. Now, I'm assuming you're talking a live online traditional course that at a minimum needs to be 1 LU or 1 hour long. Those should go the full 50 minutes. That 50 minutes, though, can include the Q&A period, as long as the Q&A is on topic. That does not include shifting over to the marketing pitch and the sales pitch and showing products and some of those things. So 50 minutes of educational content is required for that LU. Now, the other side of this is we do have nano learning, and nano learning are those courses that are smaller than 1 LU. So if you have a course that is 15 to 29 minutes long, that can qualify for 0.25 LUs. If you have a course that is 30 to 45 minutes long, that can qualify for 0.5 LU. We don't have 0.75 because the moment that you go over 45 minutes, you're only 4 minutes away from a full hour, so 0.75 just didn't make sense. Once again, for our basic providers, we are removing the restriction that you have today. Prior to this, basic providers were not allowed to present anything online. Basic providers were only allowed to do in-person training. Through May 31st, basic providers may do online live classes. Basic providers still may not do on-demand e-learning. If you have any questions about that, just contact us at ces@aia.org. Question here, can a session be updated from live to online delivery? No, at present you can't update the session. You can't go back and edit the session that way, but creating a new session is not that hard, and the fact that you have an extra session out there that doesn't ever get used is not a big deal. And I will give you all a preview. Within the next couple of weeks, you will see the ability to delete sessions that you haven't used before. We're getting that ready to roll out soon. How do we encourage you to get the AIA numbers for attendees? Is it best to do this in email in advance, or is this something that could be done offline? As much as possible, and this is where the question earlier about should you make people pre-register, you may find that having people pre-register makes life a whole lot easier because then you can capture that information. What you should look at, though, with the platforms is most platforms, at least, even if it's not pre-registration, they might have a sign-in page before you even get into the webinar that you can customize to ask for things like their AIA number. I know that many of you struggle with our members giving you their numbers. We're working with our members on that, but that's something that I definitely you can see. If you use a registration page, you can ask those questions. So a question here, can people attend a webinar for 20 minutes and then read 40 minutes of material? That falls into the blended learning category, and that's a little bit different than what we're looking for here. And it's a little more complex in terms of a yes or no answer. What we would really prefer to see with the live online delivery is really a full 1 LU, or if it's a nano learning course, the full time done as part of that live intervention. If you look at our AIA standards for continuing education programs, we do have some criteria for how you measure and deliver blended learning programs, and that would cover this question. If you've got written materials, if you've got on-demand materials, if you've got live online materials, how you can go through the different pieces to kind of put those all together to make one course. Question here, if you record a presentation and then say put it onto YouTube while the live stream happens, can self-reporting be used by someone who watches the recording later? No. That sort of circumvents some of the policies that we have in place, and it really deals with the fact that we want people to have an interactive experience as part of their education. So by putting it out on YouTube as a recording and say go ahead and self-report this, you've circumvented that requirement to have an assessment as part of what an on-demand course would have, and so that sort of minimizes it. In theory, yes, somebody could self-report that. They're not going to get HSW credit for it because we don't support, except with limited exceptions, self-reporting HSW, and it really is in some way circumventing the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish. Question, is knowledge retention testing necessary for online? We do it as a matter of practice, and we monitor electronically and expect a certain score. For live online delivery, where you have an interaction with a presenter or an instructor, there is not a requirement to do formal assessment checking or formal testing. If you want to do that, that's great, and we encourage and support that, but we do not require that up front. People can take it multiple times, they can do different things, but for live online, there's not a requirement. For on-demand e-learning, again, that's the difference between the synchronous and the asynchronous. For the synchronous live online, where people have to show up and there's a live instructor, there is not a requirement for a test. For on-demand e-learning, there is a requirement for an assessment. There's a question that says, as a manufacturer, one of the key elements of Lunch and Learn is the samples, the physical objects that can help people learn. In your experience, do online presenters ever ship physical samples? We have seen that done in some cases, and in some cases that's also because they already have a sort of a materials library in their firm, so that's something that could fit into some of those pieces. If there are specific things that you want people to be able to touch and see and feel, yes, it would make sense to ship those things out. Now, one of the things to remember during this time in particular is that it's not just you who's going to be remote. Most of the firms are probably working remotely as well, with people practicing social distancing. And as a result, you're not just shipping to the firm, you would have to ship to all the participants, and that could be cumbersome for you. So there isn't a requirement to do that. And you should consider different ways that you could get around that. Maybe high-resolution photographs. maybe an offer at the end of the presentation that a sample would be available for people that want to explore more. But again, from your own point of view, eliminating some of the logistics overhead of trying to ship to 20 or 30 different people every time you did a webinar, that's something to consider. Again, I'm looking through this right now. This is a question that says that the concept of online presenting is new to me, so my question may be elementary. One of the architectural firms that I had set up for the end of the month has closed their offices until further notice. All staff are now working from home. I think this is a situation that we're going to see in a lot of places. So how do attendees access continuing education if what we're doing, such as sign in and so on, is specific to online? Would they be able to see a PowerPoint, as we're seeing with you, but would they not be able to see me as a presenter? Again, it's really going to depend on your platform. I could turn on my camera now and you could see me as the presenter. It's one of those things that I just determined that it wasn't valuable enough for you to be able to see me talking for you to get good content out of the presentation. So for this, you had a really somewhat simple presentation. Most of it was black and white slides with the red AIA and our logo. And I hope that even though they were relatively simple slides, that you got a lot of content out of it. That's sort of what we're saying works well, and that's a good way to get started. So if this is something that's new to you, that's a good way to start off, is to start off with the simple and then move into the more advanced. So let me go through. Question here about, so what do you need to do to convert an in-person to an on-demand course? Really, it's just a matter of moving your content to the right platform. So in this case, I could have just as easily done this presentation in a room with 500 people, but I had 500 people that were all in 500 different locations. And so the only difference is that instead of putting my slide deck up on a projector on a screen behind me, you're seeing my slide deck in a little box on your computer in front of you. That's really all that it took to convert this from an in-person to an on-demand course. Can you present to multiple firms at once, or does it need to be limited to one firm at a time? It does not need to be limited in any way, shape, or form. Now, you may have some firms that want you to tailor content specifically to them, in which case you are going to be going to a specific firm. But you can consider this an opportunity to reach some of those firms that in the past didn't necessarily make sense to you. So some of our smaller firms, some of the sole practitioners, people who you wouldn't necessarily go in to do a one-on-one presentation with a sole practitioner for a CEU event. But instead, you now can say or put something on your website that says, hey, next Tuesday at 2 o'clock, we're going to be doing our 1LU HSW course on fenestration. You know, show up at this time, log in, sign in, register, and you can go ahead and take this course. And you will find that you'll gather bigger audiences for those. So again, this is an opportunity for you to look at different options when you go through. A question here about this Q&A is would we be willing to type up these questions and answers for the session and tomorrow's sessions and post them online. We will capture all of these questions and work on putting together an FAQ that we'll try to get posted within the next few days. Question here, do you have resources posted online relating to an on-demand course requirements? Yes, and I will tell you right now that that's one place that we fell a little bit short with this webinar, and I'm actually going to have our web person make an update to our website. If you have specific requirements that people should know about before, technical requirements before they take a course, so for instance with Adobe Connect, one of the things we've found is if you have the Adobe Connect add-in installed on your computer, it tends to work better than the web-based version. Right now what I'm looking at is roughly 20% of you came in through the client. The rest of you came in through the web-based. Well, had we posted on the website beforehand, you will have a better experience if you download the add-in and provided a link to where you can get the add-in. We probably would have seen a higher percentage of you using the add-in. So posting those things ahead of time can be very helpful for participants. The new rules regarding basic providers are in effect starting today. A notification will be going out by the end of the week. We've got a couple other technical changes we're making to the CE dashboard, but you can consider that as of today, if you are a basic provider, you are allowed to deliver courses as live online courses. So we've got another question about moving from a course like we have today to an on-demand course. And that's a little different than what we had been covering up to this point. If you want to move it to be an on-demand course, it would involve, in this case, I could take the recording of this presentation. I then would post that recording to a place, to a learning management system or to some other platform, and I would have to add to it the final assessment. So in this case, because we're at a 1-hour course, I would need to add a 10-question quiz. All of the requirements for on-demand courses are listed in our standards for continuing education programs, and so it goes through all of the different components that are required in an on-demand course versus an online course. It's a little more complex. That conversion is a little more complex to do. That's one place that if you are new to this, that's a place that you really could reach out to some of our platform providers. This is what our platform providers do for a lot of other providers. So if you're looking to move from that live in-person and transfer over and make that an on-demand course, there's a little more complexity, there's a little more expense involved in that. And looking through, I think that I have gone through the bulk of your questions. If I didn't get to one of your questions along the way, feel free to repost that because I'm down at the bottom of my list now, so I think I hit everybody. Thank you all very much for attending today. If you have additional questions, if you have additional things that you need to know, the email address on the screen, ces@aia.org, puts a ticket into our system, and I can route that as appropriate. So if these are things that are related to delivery standards and so on, we'll get that to the right people. If you have questions about what type of provider you are, we can get you answers to that as well. Again, thank you all very much for attending. If you've got other people from your organization who would find this useful, again, we'll be running this webinar tomorrow at 2:00 p.m. Eastern, right here in the same exact room. Again, thank you all so much for your time, and with that, I am going to go ahead and sign out.